After a long, exhausting day at work, all I wanted was to come home, kick back, and enjoy some peace and quiet. But the moment I stepped through the front door, that plan went straight out the window. The house wasn't silent like I'd expected. Instead, it was filled with the loud, animated voices of my wife, Victoria, and her best friend, Rachel. Their chatter echoed through the living room, sharp and intense, not your typical friendly catch-up. It wasn't just the volume that grabbed my attention, it was the tone. There was something in their voices, an edge, like they were knee-deep in a heated discussion. But the second the door clicked shut behind me, everything changed. Their lively conversation died abruptly, replaced by hurried whispers and awkward glances. I froze for a second, my gut tightening with that all-too-familiar feeling, like I just walked into the middle of something I wasn't supposed to hear. Trying to shake it off, I stepped into the living room. They both glanced at me, their expressions stiff, almost like kids caught doing something they shouldn't. "What were you two talking about?" I asked, keeping my voice calm but firm. Victoria let out this quick, nervous laugh, waving her hand like it was no big deal. "Oh, we just realized we were being too loud," she said, flashing me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I wasn't buying it. Not for a second. "That's not an answer," I replied, crossing my arms and shifting my gaze between the two of them. They both looked too casual, like they were trying a little too hard to seem unbothered. Rachel avoided eye contact entirely, suddenly fascinated by her phone. Victoria held her ground, though, giving me a tight smile before saying, "I'll tell you about it when the time is right." That hit me like a slap. I hated vague answers. I hated secrets even more. But I also knew better than to push her while Rachel was still there. Starting a fight in front of company never ends well. So, I swallowed my frustration and let it slide, for the moment. As soon as Rachel left, though, I wasn't about to let it go. The second the door clicked shut behind her, I turned to Victoria. "All right, what's going on? What are you hiding?" My voice was sharper now, laced with frustration I didn't bother masking. She sighed, running her hand through her hair like she was already tired of the conversation. "It's nothing bad," she insisted. "It's just, there's a problem. Something only one person can help me with. Rachel and I were talking about it." "What kind of problem?" I pressed, my patience wearing thin. She shook her head, her expression unreadable. "I'll tell you everything once it's sorted. But I'll need your help tomorrow. I need you to drive me somewhere and pick me up after." That was it. No details, no explanation, just a vague request for help? My frustration boiled over. Why not just tell me now? If it's such a big deal, don't you think I deserve to know? She met my eyes, her gaze steady, unflinching. "You're not going to get it out of me tonight," she said flatly. "But trust me, everything will be fine." That was all she gave me. And it wasn't nearly enough. But I knew her well enough to realize that pushing harder would be pointless. She could be as stubborn as I was when she wanted to be. So, with a heavy sigh, I let it rest, for now. But as I lay in bed that night, sleep didn't come easy. My mind was a mess of unanswered questions, each one more infuriating than the last. What kind of problem was so huge she couldn't tell me about it? Why was Rachel involved? And why did it feel like I was being deliberately kept in the dark? I stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was nothing. That I'd find out soon enough. But deep down, that gnawing feeling wouldn't go away. Something was off. I just didn't know what. The next morning, I was jolted awake by Victoria shaking my shoulder, her voice sharp and urgent. "Come on, we need to go," she whispered, her words slicing through the haze of sleep like a knife. Groggy and confused, I sat up, rubbing my eyes. "Go where?" I mumbled, my brain still trying to catch up. But she was already moving around the room, pulling on her clothes with frantic energy that felt completely out of place for a Saturday morning. When I finally focused, I frowned. She was dressed differently. A short skirt, tight-fitted top, clothes she hadn't worn in ages. It wasn't her usual style, and it certainly wasn't what I'd expect for some early morning errand. "Why are you dressed like that?" I asked, my voice flat, trying not to let the irritation seep through. She paused just long enough to glance at me over her shoulder. "Trust me, it's important," she said, offering nothing more before heading out the door. That wasn't an answer, but I knew better than to start an argument before coffee. So, reluctantly, I got up, threw on some clothes, and followed her out to the car. She handed me a crumpled piece of paper with an address scribbled on it in her messy handwriting. No explanation. No details. Just that. I started the engine, my mind racing with questions, but I kept them to myself, for now. The drive was short, but the tension felt like it stretched on for miles. When we pulled up to the destination, my confusion morphed into something deeper. It was a fancy restaurant, the kind of place we'd only go to for anniversaries or special occasions, not whatever this was. "What is this?" I asked, but before I could get a real answer, she was already out of the car, walking briskly toward the entrance. I noticed Rachel waiting by the door, dressed just as provocatively. They exchanged a quick hug, then disappeared inside together, leaving me sitting in the car with more questions than ever, and no answers in sight. Something about this whole situation didn't sit right with me. My gut screamed that whatever was going on wasn't as innocent as Victoria wanted me to believe. So, against my better judgment, I parked the car, slipped on my sunglasses, and followed them inside. I kept a low profile, sliding into a booth near the window where I had a clear view of their table. I ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a black coffee, just enough to keep the waiter from hassling me. From where I sat, I had a perfect line of sight. Victoria and Rachel were sitting with two men, both dressed in sharp suits. One of the guys was holding Rachel's hand, his thumb lazily brushing over her knuckles like they were more than just casual acquaintances. The other was leaning in close to Victoria, his hand resting on the table, fingers just inches from hers. At first, the conversation seemed serious, lots of nodding, hushed tones. But then, laughter. The kind of laughter that comes from familiarity, not business. Victoria tossed her head back at one point, her hand brushing the guy's arm as if it was the most natural thing in the world. My stomach twisted. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos. Just in case. I wasn't sure why, but I had a feeling I'd need them. I stayed just long enough to confirm what my instincts already knew. This wasn't some business meeting. It was something else. Something deliberate. Planned. And Victoria had gone out of her way to make sure I was nowhere near it. When I couldn't take it anymore, I left the restaurant and sat in the car, my mind racing. The images replayed over and over, each detail fueling the anger bubbling beneath the surface. I didn't know what was going on, but one thing was crystal clear. Victoria was hiding something. And I was going to find out exactly what. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Victoria. "Hey, can you come pick me up?" Her voice was casual, almost cheerful. Like nothing was out of the ordinary. I didn't say much on the drive back. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, my jaw clenched so hard it felt like it might snap. When she slid into the passenger seat, she looked satisfied. Like whatever had happened inside that restaurant had gone exactly how she wanted. "You're going to be shocked when I tell you everything," she said, grinning like a kid with a secret. "Yeah," I muttered, keeping my eyes on the road. "You'll tell me." But I already knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. And soon, I'd have the truth. As soon as we stepped through the front door, I couldn't hold it in any longer. The tension that had been simmering all day finally boiled over. "All right," I snapped, slamming the door shut behind me. "Enough of this nonsense. What were you doing at that restaurant with those two guys and Rachel?" Victoria blinked, clearly caught off guard by my tone. "Were you following me?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief, as if that was the issue here. I couldn't believe it. "Following you? Are you serious right now? Have you seen how you've been acting these past few days? I'm not the one sneaking around and whispering like I've got something to hide." She opened her mouth to argue, then stopped, letting out a long, frustrated sigh. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to me. "You're not going to like this," she muttered. I unfolded it, expecting, I don't know, something that would make sense. Instead, it was an address and some scribbled notes, nothing that explained anything. She finally spoke, her voice quieter now. "I made a mistake at work. A big one. And this sleazebag noticed. He threatened to tell my boss unless I agreed to go out with him." My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "You what?" And your brilliant plan was to meet with him instead of coming to me. I didn't go out with him, she snapped. I wasn't about to stoop to that level. That's what Rachel and I were talking about. How to handle it. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to keep my temper in check. You should have told me. One conversation with that guy, and he wouldn't have dared pull that crap. She shook her head, her expression tight. It doesn't matter now. He got fired not long after. Problem solved. Problem solved. I repeated, laughing bitterly. Because from where I'm standing, nothing about this looks solved. She looked away, clearly choosing her next words carefully. I needed to figure out what to do next. Christmas is coming, we've got bills, and I couldn't just sit around waiting for a paycheck that might not come. So, I asked Rachel for help. She set up that meeting to introduce me to some people. They might have an opportunity for me. What kind of people? I demanded. And what kind of job? She shrugged like it was no big deal. I don't know all the details yet. Rachel says it's a good opportunity, but she'll explain everything when the time is right. We're supposed to go to her place next weekend, and I'll know more then. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. Plans that required this much secrecy rarely led anywhere good. But I could see it in her eyes. She'd made up her mind. Pushing harder wouldn't get me anywhere. Fine, I muttered, my voice low. But this had better be worth it. She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled with my tone. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling while her soft, even breathing filled the room. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The vague explanations. The secrecy. The mysterious meeting at a fancy restaurant. And now, some country house gathering that was supposed to magically answer all my questions? None of it added up. But for now, all I could do was wait. And the waiting was killing me. The week leading up to this mysterious gathering felt like it dragged on forever. I tried to pry more details out of Victoria, but she and Rachel had this unspoken pact, like they'd rehearsed the same lines. All in due time, they'd say with these forced smiles that only fueled my frustration. Every time I asked for more, Victoria would just give me that reassuring smile, like that was supposed to magically put my mind at ease. When the weekend finally arrived, Victoria spent the whole morning getting ready, more effort than I'd seen her put in for anything work-related before. She wore a sleek, tight blouse and a mini-skirt that showed off more than I was comfortable with, especially for what was supposedly a business opportunity. Meanwhile, I threw on a simple shirt and dress pants, trying to keep it together, even though my gut was screaming that something was wrong. We got in the car, and she gave me directions to Rachel's place, which turned out to be some massive countryside house. When we pulled up, my suspicions only grew. The driveway was packed with luxury cars, the kind of expensive, flashy vehicles you'd expect to see at some exclusive event, not a casual weekend hangout. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but business. It felt like a party. Fancy decorations, people holding glasses of champagne, music thumping softly in the background. Everyone was dressed to impress, with smiles plastered on their faces like they had no worries in the world. Almost immediately, the two men from the restaurant appeared. They made a beeline straight for Victoria, showering her with compliments, their grins a little too wide, their eyes lingering a little too long. I stayed close, observing, biting my tongue as I watched them act overly familiar with my wife. The tension in my chest grew with every fake laugh she gave them. I couldn't help myself. "You two really enjoyed that dinner, huh?" I said, my voice low but laced with just enough edge to make my point. Their smiles faltered for a brief second, but one of them recovered quickly. "Absolutely," he replied smoothly. "But tonight is where the real decisions are made. It's about your wife's future." That made me freeze. Her future? What the hell was that supposed to mean? And what exactly does that mean? I asked, not even bothering to hide my skepticism. The man smirked. "She'll explain. It depends on the role she's chosen. This is a unique process, as you'll see." His vague, cryptic answers only made my blood boil more. "Why not just have a formal interview, then?" I shot back. He shrugged like it was nothing. Formal interviews attract the wrong crowd, people who hide behind fancy degrees instead of showing who they really are. Here, everyone's relaxed. Open. It's a better way to gauge compatibility. Before I could respond, Rachel swooped in, her tone dripping with that fake, sweet charm she always had when she wanted to smooth things over. "This is just how it works," she said. "Trust me, everything's fine. Let her go through it." I wanted to argue. Every part of me screamed to drag Victoria out of there and demand answers. But instead, I clenched my jaw and stepped back, swallowing my anger. Not long after, Victoria was called away for a private discussion. I tried to follow, but Rachel blocked my path, her smile gone now, replaced with a firm, no-nonsense look. "Stay here. It's part of the process," she said sharply. So, I stayed. I stood there, fists clenched, heart racing, listening to the muffled voices behind closed doors. I couldn't make out any words, just the occasional burst of laughter or the low hum of serious conversation. When Victoria finally reappeared, she was glowing. Her face lit up with excitement, like she'd just been told she'd won the lottery. "You won't believe it," she gushed, practically bouncing on her toes. "I'm going to be a senior client relations manager." The two men followed her out, patting her on the back, congratulating her, and mentioning some special assignment she'd be starting soon. Naturally, I wanted to know more. "What kind of assignment?" I asked, my voice tight. She gave me a playful smile and brushed it off. "I'll tell you all about it when we're home. For now, let's just enjoy the night." Against my better judgment, I nodded. We mingled, talking to various guests, but no one seemed to know, or was willing to share, much about the company Victoria was supposedly working for. Everyone danced around the details like it was some big secret. The drive home was quiet, but Victoria's excitement was palpable. She practically buzzed with energy, grinning to herself like she was in on some wonderful secret. As we pulled into the driveway, she turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "Big things are coming," she said softly. "You'll see." But all I saw was the start of something I couldn't control. And that terrified me more than anything. The days following that bizarre party felt like walking through a fog. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself otherwise. Victoria's excitement was contagious on the surface, but underneath it all, there was this gnawing dread I couldn't ignore. Every time I asked about her new position, she'd brush it off with vague answers, promising, "I'll tell you everything soon." But soon never seemed to come. Her schedule shifted almost overnight. She started leaving early, coming home late, claiming she was swamped with work. Her explanations were always the same rehearsed lines: big projects, tight deadlines, confidential assignments. It was like talking to a brick wall, one that smiled and deflected instead of giving straight answers. One night, after she got home looking more energized than usual, she dropped another bomb. "Tomorrow's the big day," she announced with a grin that didn't reach her eyes. "Everything we've been working on is leading up to this." "What exactly is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She chuckled softly, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. "You'll see. It's going to be worth it, I promise. This could even mean a big raise for me." Her words felt hollow, like she was reading from a script. But I didn't push. I was tired of the half-truths, the late nights, the sudden shifts in behavior. Whatever this big day was, I figured I'd finally get some answers. Or so I thought. When I got home from work the next evening, the house was eerily quiet. No sign of Victoria. Her absence wasn't entirely unusual given her new schedule, but something about the silence felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts. I tried calling her, but it rang until it went to voicemail. Frustrated, I paced the living room, the walls closing in with every unanswered ring. I left a message, my voice tight with barely controlled irritation, then waited. Hours passed. It was well past midnight when the front door creaked open. Victoria stumbled in, reeking of alcohol, her clothes disheveled and stained with something. I stared at her, waiting for an explanation. But she didn't offer one. She barely looked at me, just mumbled something incoherent and staggered toward the bedroom. I followed her, my heart pounding with equal parts rage and confusion. She collapsed onto the bed without a word. That's when I snapped. While she passed out, I grabbed her phone. I knew it was a breach of privacy, but I didn't care. I needed answers, and she wasn't giving them to me. What I found shattered whatever illusions I'd been clinging to. Text after text, message after message, it was all there. She wasn't working late on projects. She wasn't overwhelmed with client meetings. She was organizing parties. Not just any parties, swinger parties. Events that made my stomach churn just reading about them. Photos, videos, conversations that left no room for misinterpretation. My hands trembled as I scrolled further, hoping, praying, for something that would make it all make sense. But it only got worse. In one group chat, her so-called colleagues referred to her with a nickname that made bile rise in my throat. Deep throat. I didn't have to guess why. And then I found the video. It wasn't just her organizing these events. She was participating. Enthusiastically. Not just with one guy, but multiple people. People I'd seen her laughing with, texting late at night, claiming it was work stuff. I couldn't watch anymore. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing, my chest tight. My world spun as everything I thought I knew crumbled around me. Without a word, I went to the closet and started pulling out her clothes. Every dress. Every pair of shoes. Every trace of her existence in my life went straight into trash bags. I wasn't going to let her spend another night under my roof. By the time I was done, the bags were piled by the door, waiting for her when she woke up. The next morning, she stumbled into the living room. Rubbing her temples like a hangover was the worst thing she had to deal with. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the bags. "What's going on?" she croaked, her voice hoarse. I didn't mince words. "What's going on? Maybe it's the fact that you've been lying to me. Or maybe it's the video of you screwing half your office. Take your pick." Her face shifted from confusion to fury in seconds. "You went through my phone? That's private." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Private? That's what you're worried about? You're covered in God knows what, and I'm the problem. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing into slits. You just don't understand. I enjoy it, okay? Stop trying to control me and stay out of my business. That was the final straw. Get out, I said, my voice cold and flat. Take your things and leave. You're not staying here another minute. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just grabbed the bags, shot me one last glare, and walked out the door. But her betrayal wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. After Victoria left, the house felt hollow. The silence wasn't comforting, it was suffocating. Every corner of our home held echoes of her laughter, her lies, the false reality I'd been living in. But I wasn't going to let that feeling consume me. I refused to let her betrayal be the final chapter of my story. I hired an attorney the very next day. I laid out everything, texts, photos, the damning video. Together, we started piecing it all together, focusing on the so-called company that had been the front for her secret life. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was an organized operation disguised as legitimate business practices, blurring the lines between professional networking and flat-out exploitation. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, testimonies from former employees, anonymous tips, all pointing to the same conclusion. It wasn't just Victoria. It was bigger than her. She was just a small piece in a much larger, much darker puzzle. We filed a lawsuit against the company, accusing them of running an illicit operation under the guise of corporate recruitment. The authorities got involved quickly once they saw the evidence. The company's shiny, professional facade crumbled overnight. Former employees came forward, sharing their experiences, confirming everything we'd discovered. The court didn't take long to rule in our favor. The company was shut down. Its leaders faced hefty fines and, in some cases, criminal charges. It was a small victory, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Then came the divorce. I wasn't about to let Victoria walk away unscathed. The court battle was brutal, but the evidence was a sword I wielded without hesitation. The video. The texts. Her casual, unapologetic admission of enjoying the lifestyle she'd chosen over our marriage. It painted a picture no lawyer could spin. The judge ruled in my favor. The divorce was final. She had no claim to anything I'd worked for. No alimony. No shared assets. Just her bags, her shame, and the wreckage of the life she'd torched. But Victoria wasn't done. One morning, not long after the dust had started to settle, my phone rang. Her number flashed on the screen, and against my better judgment, I answered. "You're the worst person I've ever met," she spat, venom dripping from every word. "Do you know how many people you've put out of work because of your little vendetta?" I stayed calm. "That's exactly what I wanted," I replied coolly. "Maybe now they'll find jobs that don't involve destroying lives." Her rage only grew. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "I'll make sure your life is a living hell." And she tried. Oh, she tried. She spread lies about me, telling mutual friends I was abusive, manipulative. She sent anonymous emails to my boss, filled with baseless accusations, hoping to get me fired. She even posted defamatory comments online, painting herself as the victim of some twisted revenge plot. But I was ready for her. I documented everything. Every message, every rumor, every attempt to tarnish my name. My attorney and I fired off cease and desist letters. When she crossed the line, and she always did, we dragged her back to court. Each time, the evidence cleared my name and exposed her vindictiveness for what it was. Eventually, the court issued a restraining order. She was legally barred from contacting me or interfering in my life in any way. Her attempts to ruin me only made me stronger. She thought she could break me, but all she did was prove how right I was to leave her behind. With the legal battles behind me, I decided it was time to control the narrative. For too long, I'd been reacting to her actions, cleaning up the mess she left in her wake. It was time to go on the offensive. I had the video, the one that showed the full extent of her betrayal. I didn't make the decision lightly, but I knew it needed to be seen. Not out of spite, but for closure. For truth. I sent it to a select group of people, her closest friends, her family, the ones who'd believed her lies. The reactions were swift and brutal. Friends who had stood by her cut ties immediately. Family members who defended her were left speechless. Her carefully crafted facade shattered overnight. The whispers grew louder, the judgment inescapable. She tried to spin it, of course, claiming I was out to ruin her life. But the evidence spoke louder than her lies. Unable to handle the fallout, she packed her things and left town. She moved somewhere no one knew her, trying to start over, far from the people who now saw her for who she truly was. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she struggled to rebuild her life. Jobs didn't last. Relationships crumbled under the weight of her past. But by then, I'd stopped caring. Her problems weren't mine anymore. As for me, I sold the house, the one filled with memories I didn't want. I moved to a new place, a fresh start where her shadow couldn't reach me. It wasn't just a new home. It was freedom. In my new life, I found peace. Real peace. Not the fragile illusion I'd been clinging to during our marriage. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I'd neglected, and, most importantly, I learned to live for myself again. People often ask me, why go to such lengths? Why fight so hard? The answer's simple, because I deserved better. And now I have it. Her betrayal was the worst thing that ever happened to me. But it was also the best thing. It forced me to face the truth, to stop making excuses, and to reclaim my life. The scars are there, sure. But they're reminders, not of what I lost, but of what I survived. And in the end, that's the real victory. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.